Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Breaking DevOps Deadlock. Before I start, a couple of housekeeping points. There will be a live Q&A at the end of the session, but do feel free to follow the conversation on Twitter, hashtag DevOps Deadlock. Submit any questions there, comments, etc., and we'll be monitoring them online. My name's Andy Cureton. I'm the founder and managing director of ECS Digital. I'm very pleased to be able to present this webinar to you alongside Jen Thompson from IDC and Dave Gore from Lloyds Banking Group, and they'll introduce themselves a little later. I founded Forest Technologies back in 2003. And we joined the ECS group in 2016 when ECS Digital was formed. Brief introduction to ECS Digital. We are ultimately a DevOps, digital transformation, automation consultancy. It's all we do. It's all we've ever done since back in 2003, and our sole focus really is on enabling organizations to achieve their goals through the adoption of DevOps methodologies, ways of working, etc. Service areas covering digital transformation, DevOps continuous delivery, cloud strategy and architecture, methodologies such as Agile, BDD, ATDD, etc. On the right-hand side of this slide, I don't propose to go through it, but some of the benefits that we've delivered to our customers, really all about improving efficiency and agility of our customers. Very proud to be able to introduce some of our customers to you and some of our partners here. So some of the largest names in the UK in the FTSE 100. But also some large global names such as Walmart, as we do operate on a global basis and have teams in Singapore as well as Pune, head office UK London, and also offices in Edinburgh and Glasgow. We have a wide variety of capability, deep capability across leading tools in the DevOps tool chain. But we do have particular partnerships where we'll have even greater capability. So with HashiCorp as an example, we're their UK training partner and one of their UK consulting partners, similarly with Docker, etc. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jen, who's going to talk about IDC's latest research around DevOps adoption and specifically DevOps Deadlock.
Thanks, Andy. So Jen Thompson, I'm working for IDC. For those of you who don't know IDC, we're a research and consulting organization, and I'm heading up our research in application development and deployment, and head up our DevOps practice here in Europe. So I'm going to spend some time just to share with you what IDC's view is of how organizations can accelerate their DevOps journey to get past what we're terming as the DevOps deadlock and to get to what we're describing as DevOps determined. So on the first slide, I wanted to share with you kind of and consider the leading business priorities that are shaping CIO agendas and therefore influencing the strategies that are required to survive. And you can see on the slide that customer experience is firmly at the top of business agendas in 2018. So it's no longer about mass standardization, but it's really about delivering the right and unique customer experiences, and we need to do that at speed. Number two there is CIOs are really looking at how they can continue to improve operational efficiency through process transformation. Now, many organizations that I've spoken with in the past week, in the past few months, they're really looking at how they can blend technologies, automation, and talent to meet future business requirements. Number three, of course, this is all about continuing to drive innovation through digital product and service development. And of course, this requires relentless focus on providing the right architecture to drive innovation at speed. And then, of course, number four, it's this kind of persistent focus on increasing organizational productivity. So if we go to the next slide, then this customer-centric vision and focus really brings up some pertinent challenges when we start to dig beneath the surface. So the first one is really the application modernization challenge and how we can support innovation at scale. So looking at the top application modernization challenges in 2018, these are really revolving around, first and foremost, the integration of different types of applications. So this, of course, involves newer cloud native apps that need to integrate with the legacy apps and enable workflows and user experiences seamlessly across the business. Of course, and we've been talking about this for a couple of years now, we have to accelerate the development cycle times and developer productivity, and we have to get access to adequate and relevant skills. And this is an ongoing and persistent challenge as organizations pivot to digital and cultural transformation. So on the following slide, this is the second biggest impact that we're going to be seeing on the horizon. Now, for those of you that know IDC, know that we calculate and we forecast and we like playing with numbers. We've been putting together a few calculations, and we're predicting that in the next 5 years, because of new tools and platforms, because of more developers, because of agile methods, because of lots of code reuse, we're going to see 500 million new logical applications being created. Now, to put this into perspective, this is actually equal to the number of applications that was built in the past 40 years. So if we move to the next slide, this emphasis on speed and innovation and the delivery of unique customer experiences, one thing is fundamentally clear. Agile and DevOps tools and approaches have to become the default for all enterprises. I mean, essentially, it's mandatory. And certainly, from IDC's perspective, from my perspective, it's mandatory, and we have to move forwards with it. So on the following slide, we have actually been running a number of surveys, and the most recent survey confirms that DevOps is rapidly being adopted to drive business change and agility. So 60% of large European organizations have adopted, and 29% are planning to adopt DevOps practices in the coming 12 months. For those of you on the line, I'll let you guys do the math, but one thing is clear, DevOps is certainly mainstream. And I think what's becoming evident is that there are certain organizations that are starting to really push and excel on the DevOps journey. And there's a few names on the slide, and I'd like you to note that, what you're not seeing on the slide are the digital natives or the unicorns. These are traditional organizations that are starting to see some real benefits from the adoption of these methodologies. But on the following slide, it's very, very true and certain that the journey for the majority of organizations is far from over. So in reality, the journey to enterprise scale DevOps is only just beginning. If we kind of dig into the details and look at the percentage of application estates that are being developed and deployed using this methodology today, then we can see that it sits at just under or just over 30%. So just under a third. But when we dig into the details, we can start to distinguish between two very distinct groups of organizations. And the performance gap between these groups of organizations is widening. So the first group we kind of distinguish as the protagonists to DevOps, and we refer to these organizations as the DevOps determined. Now, these organizations have over 30% of the application estate that is being developed and deployed using a DevOps methodology today. And you can see from the number on that slide, the average for this group is actually at just under 50%. This group represents approximately 40% of large European organizations. The second group, we've labeled these guys DevOps distracted. And typically there are other distractions or challenges that are taking first place within these organizations, and they're finding it difficult to scale DevOps from the experimentational stage where it began. These organizations represent 60% of the large organizations that we're speaking with, and you can see that the average for this group of the percentage of the application estate that is being developed and deployed in this way is sitting at 16%. So you can see that that gap is fairly wide. And if we really need to start to concentrate on how we can accelerate that determination or that determined lever. And if we move on to the next slide, this is fundamental because our data is suggesting that almost 60% of that distracted group are at what we can describe as a DevOps deadlock, and they just simply can't get past some of the challenges and bottlenecks in those initial phases. So we really need to focus on how we get unstuck and how we can accelerate change. So we've been piecing together what it means to be DevOps determined. And on the following slide, you'll actually see that we've started to identify key characteristics or KPIs, if you will, for what a DevOps determined organization looks like. We've outlined 5 areas here. The first area is organization. Now, a DevOps determined organization has an overall organizational structure that really embeds a DevOps approach. So the organization's highly collaborative, agile teams, they're working to an MVP ethic, there's continuous customer feedback. So essentially, DevOps is business as usual. It is sustainable. It's not just an experimentation. And the culture is focused on customer satisfaction. The second point, hyper-agile architectures, hyper-agile applications. DevOps projects often rely on cloud-based tools to enable automation, speed, and quality. And really the focus here is on the standardization of the container orchestration and automated infrastructure provisioning and the provision of developer self-service platforms. We have continuous delivery. A key focus of the DevOps determined organizations is really the ability to measure automation across the application lifecycle. So we've got to get to this point where we get to the pipeline of pipelines. So we've accelerated beyond islands of automation that kind of spin up. And in the automation bucket, then it's all about looking for and installing and instilling unified, scalable, and intelligent automation so that we can really get to one view of the world. And DevOps determined organizations are using multi-cloud technologies for integrated process automation, typically combined with predictive analytics. And the last one there, business leadership. Really important because DevOps determined have strong business leadership teams. These guys or girls are really focused on reinventing the budgeting process, and the executive leadership team across both business and IT are acting and communicating as one entity. So we really start to see DevOps-led business transformation. So DevOps is the foundation to the business. Of course, it starts to become fundamental that you understand where your organization is within each of these areas. And that was going to help you to almost baseline where you are and help you identify where the biggest bottlenecks exist. There are a number of challenges on this road to becoming DevOps determined, and we need to bear these in mind. And you can kind of see those 4 boxes. These are the top challenges that continue to kind of rear their heads. And, you know, we really need to take a persistent look at culture, dig into some of the talent and the retraining of the staff, get past some of the tool complexity, and really look about aligning, supporting and governing the DevOps process. So if we move to next one, you know, you can see that there are an awful lot of technology pillars that are helping to scale DevOps. So DevOps can't happen in isolation. Scaling it requires progress across multiple segments of the software delivery pipeline. The choices are broad, and there are several pillars that are helping organizations get to enterprise scale DevOps. So on the following slide, I've just put together a view of where IDC's research is showing us almost a DevOps dashboard of the current situation. So we can really start to see where organizations are today on that journey. And within each of the kind of the 4 dimensions that I've chosen to show here, we can begin to see some of the biggest differences between the DevOps determined and the DevOps distracted. Now, when you're looking at these graphs, it's best to view them as a scale that moves from left to right. So the further to the right, the higher the level of maturity. Now, if we start with the cultural dimension, culture is where almost both sets of organizations have made the most strides. You can see that 45% of the DevOps determined are focused on creating an MVP, and they have the customer feedback loops in place. And this is only just above the DevOps distracted. It's when we start to dig into the technology dimension, this is where we start to see some real differences. And this really highlights that focus has to shift beyond the cultural alignment. And we really need to start to seriously tackle the technology challenges if we're going to get to DevOps determined. In continuous delivery, for example, you can see almost 1 in 5 of the DevOps determined have achieved continuous integration. And this is against 6%, just 6% of the DevOps distracted. In automation, a quarter of the DevOps determined, they have an attitude of automate everything. And there's automation tools that are used across both development and operations. And that's just against 9% for the DevOps distracted. And then in hyper agile architectures, we can see that 17% of the DevOps determined, they've achieved a situation where they have application-aware analytics, which is driving infrastructure automation across these multi-cloud environments. And this is compared to just 7% for the DevOps distracted. Now, the journey is a long one. It's also a complex one. But organizations are starting to put the building blocks in place to be able to drive successful enterprise scale DevOps. And so setting the path, which is the following slide. So if we move just one more, we've kind of focused on pulling out 3 of the focal points for each of these critical building blocks in actually getting to enterprise scale DevOps. And it's good to remember these kind of like 5 boxes or 5 circles as they're represented on the graph there. And it's really about having an inclusive culture, and we've got to have a convergence in the KPIs and the strategy. It's about working on a phased approach to application modernization to get to hyper agile apps. And it's about thinking about, as we move forwards, the integration of AI, of analytics, is going to be critical to the DevOps processes. And organizations have got to focus on measuring automation across the application lifecycle. And of course, unified automation has to be a core focus, because we have to get beyond islands of automation that have spun up. And I think critically, getting to enterprise scale DevOps also requires a certain amount of partnership re-engineering. And on the final slide that I wanted to share with you guys, I wanted to provide you with a view of what DevOps determined organizations are thinking about in terms of working with sourcing and IT services partners moving forwards. So what we found from a recent survey that we've done is that the DevOps determined are looking to re-engineer and adapt partner strategies. So if we think over the years, a number of organizations, they've outsourced major parts of their application and IT operations with varying degrees of success. DevOps, of course, is rearing its head, and it's having this fundamental impact on these strategies. And organizations are evaluating future setup and procurement of IT services. So the DevOps Determined, we actually see that they're planning to re-engineer and redesign IT sourcing strategies to ensure business agility and to alleviate any potential bottlenecks. And I think, it's fair to say that with digital and software defined becoming a strategic priority, the IT function is gaining a new importance. And we're all aware DevOps demands high levels of communication, collaboration, and integration. So it's no surprise that DevOps is changing the rules of partnering strategies. That's all that I'm sharing with you guys today. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm going to pass back to Andy.
Thanks, Jen. That's really great set of research there, and certainly from our perspective, you're absolutely right. DevOps is no longer optional. I dug out a quote from a previous presentation I gave, which I think kind of, for me, sums up in a line the challenge that organisations are facing, and it's organisations need to move much faster and adapt to evolving consumer and employee requirements if they're to survive and thrive. And I think that that just sums up the challenge that the modern organisation is facing. So, given the subject of this webinar is how we break this deadlock. From an ECS perspective, we've got 4 key points that we feel are critical, and we're seeing that customers that are exhibiting these traits are actually succeeding in getting past this kind of deadlock and really gaining traction in their programs of work. So first one is around the structure of the program itself. The second one is around, and I'll go into these points, second one's around the communication associated, requirements around outside of the engineering organisation to support the transformation program, and the enabling transformation touches upon the partnering strategies and really sort of follows up very nicely on that sort of last slide of yours, Jen, around sort of partner re-engineering. So the first one is structure. So this isn't a funding point, it's definitely an efficiency point. So DevOps isn't mandatory. DevOps methodologies and new tooling and ways of working are now well proven. What's not proven is how to adopt those at scale across an enterprise organization. From our perspective, we're seeing organizations succeed where there is some kind of central framework, structure, or program that is coordinating the activities across the organization. This, from our perspective, this is very important to, really DevOps is about breaking down silos. DevOps is also about efficiency. This is about not reinventing the wheel. You don't need to create Jenkins pipelines twice. You don't need to know how to containerize a .NET application more than once. You should be able to take those activities, bottle them up, create quick starts or accelerators to magnify the sort of return on the investment in creating those the first time round across the organization. And I was at a meeting this morning where this very topic was coming up, and it was around patterns and horizontal scaling for an enterprise transformation program, and this really is the secret sauce to magnifying the benefit going forward, and I think it has an increasing effect as programs move on. There certainly is an argument for starting small, making sort of tangible quick wins and publicizing them, but then taking that and magnifying that by scaling across the organization is an area that we see is very beneficial. The next one is around communication. So again, we talk about collaboration and we talk about people a lot within the context of DevOps and digital transformation. So this isn't a new thing. What is interesting from our perspective, and whilst it's perhaps common sense when you hear it, it's not necessarily something that's front of mind when you're running transformation programs, and that is that fear of change is a phenomenally powerful inhibitor at an enterprise scale. You're not dealing with 2 or 3 people that aren't interested or are slightly resistant to what you're trying to achieve or what you're trying to deliver. You could be talking about 200 or 300 or 2,000 or 3,000 who are there magnifying the inertia that is inevitably there in such a scale of organization. So really, really, really important to have communications plan, looking at all different channels. It's not an option to say, well, it's on our Confluence page, because not everybody consumes things via Confluence. It's using a variety of channels, instant messaging, Twitter, video media, etc. Because what engages people is different across geographies, across cultures, and across age ranges. So having a cohesive communication program is absolutely critical to selling the benefits to the individuals who be impacted by the change of the program, and creating a pull effect rather than a push effect. It's also really important with larger organizations to focus on that kind of external branding piece, the perception of an organization. Now, if you've been around for 200-300 years, perhaps the external perception isn't that you're the youngest, coolest, hippest place to be working. But actually, most of these organizations that we're working with are doing some seriously leading edge stuff. And they're not just talking about new ways of working on their mainframes. There's, serverless, containers, all of the other cool stuff is going on there. But as an organization, and we kind of come on to the internalizing of engineering capability later, every one of these organizations that we're working with is trying to increase their engineering capability internally. And in this particular time, these T-shaped full stack developers and engineers that we hear about will have a number of places, a number of options of companies that they can go to. So the more you improve your perception as an organization from an employer branding perspective, the better. The very last one is about ensuring benefits are visible. Large centrally funded programs that are typically running over 2 to 3 years it's essential to frequently publicize the tangible benefits at a business level that they are achieving. Otherwise, it's a racing certainty that funding will be stripped and those programs will become another failed program. Supporting organization, want to touch upon this one briefly. So you've got a fantastic engineering capability of 2,000-3,000 people. You've got superb partners that are ready to go. But you've got procurement and finance, for example. Finance want to take 3 months to approve getting people on site. Procurement want work orders that have requirements that are all specified up front in a much more kind of waterfall-esque software development style. Whereas what these transformation programs need are agile Scrum-based activities where you're able to adapt and pivot as you're delivering benefit. And it's absolutely fundamental that the organization is it understands that it needs to operate at a different kind of velocity and in a different way to support and ensure that the benefits of these transformation programs can be fully delivered. If it takes you a quarter to get a quarter's worth of work actually approved and people on the park, then over a 2-year period you're going to be losing a significant amount of productive working time. So what we're seeing everywhere, and I'm sure, I mean, sort of Jen mentioned the astronomical growth in applications, is that all businesses are becoming software-defined businesses, which is resulting in engineering becoming a first-class citizen. And because of its criticality, at least a portion of that sort of crown jewels organisations are looking to establish and increase in-house. Now, this particular slide here, again, sort of harks back to the partner engineering that Jen mentioned. This shows from the Accelerate State of DevOps report the difference between low performers and high performers. And the reason this is relevant in this partnering context is that the low performers are 3.9 times, so 4 times more likely to outsource than the high performers. And you can see the phenomenal differences in performance that the organisation, for really critical metrics that these organisations are achieving. And ultimately, one of the ways that we as ECS have created an offering to help organisations who are facing this conundrum of going faster, insourcing engineering talent, there are insufficient people in the market, etc., is through an offering that we call enablement pods. These are sprint based. These very much start with a light touch baseline of key KPIs for the specific business area that we're working in. And something that we feel is unique is that the resource profiles are dynamic as the engagement continues, so they're adjusted based on the backlog items that are being delivered in particular sprints. That's enough from me, and probably well worth handing over to Dave to hear about Lloyd's very own transformation journey.
Thanks, Andy. Afternoon all, Dave Gore. My background a few years ago was as a software engineer and a computer scientist, so I came from a technology world and would like to think I'm very much still connected in the technology world today. But where to start? Well, my technology world exists inside a big bank, a significant retail and commercial bank in the UK with an insurance business within that. So just to set the context of that, I imagine there's people listening on the webinar that are our customers. I'd like to think there are, because there's 30 million in the UK. People like ourselves that have retail banking needs, and those are met by the group. We also have 26,000 corporate customers, so large organisations that trust us with their banking needs, and around 1 million small, medium, enterprise customers kind of sitting in the middle. Around 2,000 branches in the network, so bricks and that physical presence still hugely relevant today. But of course, we have a very significant digital franchise within when you set it in the European context and scale of what we do. Processing in excess of 125 billion pounds of payments every working day of the week, so kind of structural to the UK and its economy. How many people work in that organisation? About 75,000 people work within the bank, and you're probably familiar with our key brands: Lloyds Bank, Halifax, Bank of Scotland, Scottish Widows, etc. But if you sort of double click on the bank, where do I fit? Where does engineering start to emerge, and how do we get into the DevOps kind of conversation and reveal a little bit of that this afternoon? Well, there's probably around 20,000 colleagues working in a bit of the bank called the Group Transformation Division. That bit of the organisation is tasked with delivering change to our customers and colleagues, so that we can service our customers' needs, or whatever they may be. And within that change organisation, there's a bit called the engineering organisation, and I sit within that. So I sit kind of centrally within the change organisation with a mandate to work across the lateral engineering plane within the bank today. So what does DevOps? How do we get into the DevOps conversation? Well, frankly, from my perspective, it's mostly about the people in any enterprise scale organisation. If you can unlock that and hold a good conversation across that community, then you haven't sort of started out well. So what do we want our people to create outstanding technology solutions for our customers and colleagues, and we started out by making a set of commitments to our people. So build an environment where engineers feel empowered and are encouraged to do their best, where we're working with leading edge tools and methods, and we can innovate and develop some industry leading solutions in many cases, hopefully continuously learning and developing our skills, and that our engineering group can see the impact of their hard work and feel value for their contribution, where as a team we're proud of our collective output. And I think that as a philosophy kind of underpins certainly how I think about the DevOps philosophy within the group. Building on that, we defined a set of principles, and we anchored them back to our group strategy to make sure we were relevant back to the top of the shop, if you like. So when we think about putting our customers first, very much, what's our culture? How are we thinking about the way we do our work? How are we collaborating as teams and sharing knowledge? Where we want to make a difference together. We're quite opinionated on having, to Andy's point earlier, having a method of measuring some attributes of our change system and being able to see whether the things we're doing, the interventions we're making are having a good outcome or not, to stand a chance of understanding the difference that's being made. And from a keeping it simple perspective, of course we want to drive a self-serve agenda, increase our automation levels where that's appropriate as a technique, and be a lean organisation. Also important to commit to a set of outcomes. The bank runs to a 3-year strategic cycle. Investment comes off the back of that, and what we seek to do and can achieve is anchored around that construct. So we made a set of commitments about the value that we were going to deliver to the organisation. In our world, value would be effort that we can remove out of the system of change, wastage or otherwise. Productivity, can we move product more quickly from backlog to production, or from idea to production? Can we move the dial on the quality of our product? Can we further contain defect leakage into production? Otherwise, our customers and colleagues would see all the incidents that are being managed there, and of course, improve the engagement of our workforce. You guys use the term workforce deliberately, because we've got a very large organisation comprised of permanent colleagues, contractors, consultants, and other partners. ECS Digital, of course, one of them. So having set out sort of a bit of a philosophy, a bit about how do we think about the organisation and some anchor points of DevOps. What did we actually do just to get further into the DevOps journey? We didn't just start this year. Things have been underway for some time, but sometimes I think the hardest thing is making that start. And I think when you tackle something like DevOps, you've got to actually start quite a number of things, because it is complicated. So in our case, we combined a central investment piece around a program of work titled Engineering Transformation, with the remit of being a real catalyst of change from the centre out. But we set that alongside the growing DevOps movement within the bank's transformation division and IT organisation that was already there, to build further scale into it. We provided some essential tooling and scaled that. So in our case, Jira, Confluence, Urban Code, GitHub, there was a set of capability we needed to make available. And we started to sponsor and set up guilds and communities and chapters, allowing our engineers to collaborate with people that they might not have otherwise have done. And we also started to deliver I describe a bit of a relentless campaign on building our profile internally, creating the DevOps brand, and selling that to the wider organisation. Holding a conversation around what we were doing and explaining why in words that the broader organisation could try and could seek to understand. Running events every month, so we run an event every month, rotating around our UK locations, inviting guest speakers as well as travelling to our partners in India to be as inclusive as we can. Again, holding that conversation and communicating broadly and communicating differently to the group had ever done before. This type of construct on a webinar, or using social media and video content that travels much more easily within the organisation and lands a point much more powerfully. You might have seen some of the content on LinkedIn over the last few weeks.
You are famous, Dave, aren't you, on LinkedIn?
Well,
yeah, you are there.
I am there.
If you look hard enough.
I think we also dispelled a few myths that the organisation had started to either believe in or were grappling with. Bimodal IT or twin speed IT being one of my favourites. Of the slow department and the fast department. I kind of couldn't see why that would be the case. And of course, when you scratch the surface and dig underneath it, it doesn't need to be if you think hard. And finally, of what might be a short list of the long list of things that are happening in the organisation, we picked some really hard things to transform. I think some of our organisation was quite advanced and mature in its DevOps journey. Other areas weren't. Perhaps mainframe would be an example where we needed to put a real injection of thinking and investment to move the dial. And we went on. We've done a lot this year. I think we genuinely have. We've really seen rapid adoption of the tool chains, be that in more the channel systems that we describe in the group, where they typically are more modern, more contemporary, perhaps might be a good word, Java and .NET, but also on the mainframe, be it System Z or Unisys in our case, where it turns out there isn't a massive variation in the tool chain when you actually get under the covers of can you integrate Jenkins onto Endeavour as much as you can, GitHub, and use Nexus and Sonar and Urban Code to release onto the diverse and broad set of IT that sits within the bank. It turns out that's all very possible. We started to solve some new problems. How do we include DB2 schema change and store procedure release within our software pipelines? Typically they sat outside the software pipelines where we did have CI and CD capability. It turns out, again, if you can think of it differently and want to, you can connect a data model tool and do some schema comparison, change the way software engineers think about delivering those particular technologies, strap Urban Code up to BMC Change Manager, and have things automatically arrive in your test environments or out into production. And the sort of cycle time benefits you get from that are quite considerable when you add them up and when they're done at scale. Virtualizing a lot of our estate, again, I'll use mainframe just as an example, using IBM ZDT in our case to be able to provision and stand up a mainframe on either our public or private cloud in around an hour, with all of the applications that a developer needs and the data that allows them to operate in the context of the platform they're working on, has again unlocked another valuable area for us. But it took some effort to get there, but it was nonetheless worthwhile. And I think, from building on that point, it turned out it worked quite well. I hope I don't sound surprised when I say that, but the organisation did make a considerable commitment and investment in moving the dial on how we do things, and I think we see some great results. Some of our retail platforms, for example, we see a stark decrease in defect leakage and incident rates. We see cycle times coming down from perhaps, I can think of one example where a line of code could probably ship to production in 7 months in 2017, and it now ships in 5 weeks in 2018. So not kind of shaving small amounts off the edges, some more considerable and fundamental underlying change within our teams, and not to forget what feels like a real movement within the group today that didn't exist certainly at that scale a year ago or 2 or 3 years ago, and colleagues talking openly about what has gone well. But of course, it's equally important to talk about the things that didn't go so well, and we've had some of those as well, if we're honest and candid. But in the round, some very different capability in the organisation today. And my final slide and final commentary is, I sort of asked myself, well, is that done? Is that what good looks like from a DevOps perspective? Not really, I don't think. That's moving the dial on productivity and quality and value and how our colleagues are engaged. But if we don't leave the legacy of teams that can continuously improve, think about decomposing work into smaller units, think about flow and the operational dimension of the product we're creating, in as much as we think about the feature and function, just as part of what we do, that then we haven't finished the story. And I think that's what we're really focusing on, and would be the thing I'd like to be able to say that we left within the bank, when we look back in 2-3 years' time. Thanks for listening, and Jen, Andy, thanks for the invitation to join you today.
Fantastic. That's superb, Dave. Really great to to hear real world, actual. This is how it's happening. So very powerful. I am slightly conscious that we have consumed the 45 minutes. So I would propose that we just take 5 minutes for some questions and any other questions that have come in, that we will answer those offline to those that have submitted them. Dave, you'll be devastated to hear that the first one is for you. Quite topical, I think. How are you going about demonstrating the benefits and business value of DevOps to business stakeholders, and how are you getting the business stakeholders on board with DevOps?
Yeah, no, good question, and one we tackled early on in certainly in the central program structurally. To answer the question directly, I am, and we are quite opinionated on measuring how our change system is operating, and measuring it from the systems that and processes that run over those systems, creating some data that we can look at and understand how well things are operating. So, for example, can we measure definition of done back to definition of ready, and definition of done forwards to in production? And can we baseline that number? And then can we make some interventions? I don't know, let's say we've increased our test automation, we've moved to a new tool chain, our software engineers are on head development using feature switches rather than kind of lots of branching, merging, and the net outcome of all of that is our cycle time came down. There's plenty of examples down there which say, well, now that has value, because I can now deliver the same amount of work more quickly. And simply what we do, we let the system reveal how well the system change is performing, and then there's some behind the scenes mechanics and adding up that allows us to monetize that. And then when you're holding a conversation with our CFO, you can both describe what you did and what it meant, and it's the combination of both of those things. And I think to your point, Andy, and Jen's earlier on the call, that senior stakeholder understanding and degree of empathy coming towards the engineering conversation, as well as in the other direction, our engineering community translating the work we've done into words that other areas of the organisation can understand, financial ones being an obvious one.
Yeah.
And that's what we've done. And I think it's not been a simple conversation this year, but we have made good progress and have built a trusted relationship and belief in what's been done and why.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think we've got time for one more. Jen, there's one for you here, I think, or probably best for you to answer, which is how important is it to map out the transformation journey?
Okay, so I mean, I think from certainly the conversations that IDC has and some of the DevOps summits where we've been sharing ideas, it's incredibly important to make sure that you've got the building blocks in place. And I think, Dave spoke about it very well in terms of actually making sure that you're able to scale it, but you've got the commitment through the way that you're communicating across the organization. But it's incredibly important to be able to take stock of where you are So baseline where you are, and then understand where it is you're going to, you want to get to, and make it kind of like, it's a complex process with a lot of moving dials. So I think it's really about making sure that you can get some quick wins and some quick early wins to make sure that you can start to prove the benefits. And I think there was a really important thing that Dave said, is that we need to work to identify, agree, and document measurable key performance indicators that are translatable and understandable across business and IT, because that's going to be incredibly important when it comes to moving things forward.
Yeah, it's been a perennial problem, hasn't it? IT metrics to business people. It's about how you translate them and make them relevant to that business audience. Okay, well, we are 5 minutes over time, so thank you to everybody that joined. Thank you to everybody that stayed online. We will answer any questions that we haven't had time for offline. And if anybody has any questions around the topic, anything that you wanted to raise, you'd like any further information on our enablement pods or anything else, please do reach out to us. Thank you.